Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. You know, I have to tell you that it's rather uncommon in my research experience to find primary source materials that reveal how a soldier's deeply held beliefs are changed by his wartime experience. The soldier I'm working on now fits into this unique category. He's pictured here. His name is Captain Matthew Boyd of the 73rd Indiana Infantry. Everyone knew him as Matt. He was born and raised in Brookville, Indiana. His grandfather served as an officer in the Continental Army during the Revolution. Politically, Matt was not an Abraham Lincoln fan. He was not a Republican. He supported the Democratic Party, and he was pro-slavery. But when the war came, Matt set aside his politics and joined the 73rd as a second lieutenant, and before long advanced to first lieutenant and then captain of Company F. In combat, he proved himself to be quite an officer. In fact, it's fair to state that he embodied the essence of a frontline commander. Whatever dangers his men faced, so did he. In Tennessee, during the thick of the fray at Stones River, some officers in his regiment, the 73rd, sheltered behind trees. Not Matt. He fought out in front with Company F, and when the going got tough, he helped the anxious boys in their very first major engagement load their weapons. At one point during the action, he picked up a gun in a cartridge box and started coolly firing away at the enemy. It's also fair to state that Matt's actions and those of his company helped prevent a rout of the Union Army of the Cumberland by Confederate General Braxton Bragg's Army of Tennessee on the first day of the battle. You students of the Civil War know that the Union went on to win that battle. And then a few months later, the 73rd became part of Colonel Abel D. Streight's raid on the Western and Atlantic Railroad between Chattanooga and Atlanta. Again, another note for you students of the Civil War, you know that raid did not go well for the Union. Confederate Brigadier Generals Philip D. Roddy and Nathan Bedford Forrest thwarted their movements at every turn as they crossed northern Alabama into West Georgia and their railroad. The raid ended on May 3rd, 1863. They never made it to the railroad. Forrest compelled Streight to surrender his forces, even though he outnumbered Forrest. Streight and the other officers, including Matt, were now prisoners of war. They wound up in Libby prison and suffered all the privations of confinement. After 10 months in captivity, Matt was one of the 109 Union officers who tunneled out and escaped from Libby prison. That event became known as the Great Escape. It occurred on February 9th of 1864. Word of Matt's escape successfully and all happily he got to safety within Union lines. It made its way to Indiana, where an unidentified writer mused in a local newspaper called the Weekly Republican about Matt. Here's what that person had to say. Quote, Captain Matt Boyd of the 73rd Indiana, who recently escaped from Libby prison, was expected to arrive here yesterday morning, and a large number of his political friends were at the depot to welcome him home when the train arrived, but he was not aboard. It would be a little funny if the captain had changed his sentiments in regard to slavery while suffering in Libby, the refined torture which the slaveocracy dealt out to him. His old friends would quickly turn the cold shoulder on him and denounce him at once as a black abolitionist, wouldn't they? End quote. So, turns out that the reason Matt wasn't at the depot because he missed a train. He stopped off at Chicago and told his story to the Chicago Tribune. The Chicago Tribune got a great eyewitness account of the Great Escape through the eyes of Matt. Of course, that Great Escape had been the subject of major news headlines across the country. Now, you may be wondering of the status of Matt's opinion on whether his months being held a prisoner by the quote-unquote slaveocracy, what happened? Well, it was answered a week later in a follow-up story in the Weekly Republican. Here's what the newspaper had to say. Start at the beginning. Quote, Captain Matt Boyd of the 73rd Indiana, who escaped from Libby prison on the 9th of last month, reached his home in this place on Thursday morning last, looking much better than we expected to see him after his long imprisonment and the privations he necessarily endured after getting out until he reached our lines, a period of 6 days, during which time he traveled only at nights and subsisted on the little he brought out of the prison with him. The captain thinks the rebellion is very nearly played out and approves, as we are told, of the policy of our government in arming Negroes to assist in crushing it. He visited Chicago on Friday last in company with Lieutenant Williams of the 73rd, who escaped from Libby at the same time, and from one or both of them, the Tribune obtained some additional particulars in regard to the escape, which is published in the Tuesday morning's issue, accompanied by drawings of the plan of Richmond and of the ground floor of Libby Prison. They also handed the Tribune a copy of some toasts prepared on the 4th of July last, likewise a company of some resolutions which they intended to offer, but which they were prevented from acting on by the commander of the prison, ordering their dispersal, thus preventing them from celebrating the day in the manner they intended. We copy 3 of the resolutions below, and next week we'll copy them entire, together with the toasts and the account of the escapade as given by the Tribune. Here's the 3 resolutions. Resolved, that the indignities we have suffered and the violated pledges we have witnessed only stimulates our zeal for the Union and our utter hatred of all its enemies, whether treason sympathizers in the North or the more manly and honorable armed rebels of the South. Resolved, that we heartily support the policy of the government and emancipation for the sake of the Union and making the freedmen serviceable in every way compatible with the rules of civilized warfare. Resolved, that all who seek to embarrass or obstruct the government in its deadly struggle for national existence will go down to posterity branded with the internal infamy which attaches to the name of Benedict Arnold. We understand Captain Boyd has uttered sentiments similar to the above since his return. So, end quote. And there you have the notes from the resolutions that were made by Captain Boyd and others. I think it is fair to state that as a result of these 2 newspaper articles, we can reasonably conclude that Matt had changed his mind on his deeply held beliefs about slavery, turning instead to supporting emancipation and the idea of putting black soldiers in blue uniforms. So there you have Matt's story. Oh, there is one more footnote that I want to share about Matt. After the war, the Libby prison building in which he was held, and so many others, was purchased, dismantled, reconstructed in Chicago, and opened as a museum. That was in the latter part of the 19th century. It turned out to be a popular attraction, and Matt worked there for a time as a guard. He was also a regular at a Libby escape survivors reunion group. Matt lived until 1893. So take care, and thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.